going to change the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
The fact that they don't want to become part of America makes me want to make them.
Jesse Waters never took no for an answer. With less than 2 weeks until he is sworn in, Donald Trump isn't talking about balancing the budget or lowering the price of eggs anymore. Remember that? He's going to lower the price of groceries. He won because groceries were high. Now he's going to make them lower, right? No, he's talking about annexing overseas territories, and then MAGA is scurrying to praise Trump's latest social media rambles about buying Greenland and taking back the Panama Canal, as well as making Canada the 51st state, maybe adding Mexico or renaming the Gulf of Mexico to imply U.S. ownership. The latest installment of this genuinely weird drama came yesterday as Donald Trump Jr. flew to Greenland as a PR stunt. The Republican-run House Foreign Affairs Committee tweeted, then deleted a post celebrating Trump's territorial ambitions with a headline from Rupert Murdoch's paper. Quote, President Trump has the biggest dreams for America, and it's un-American to be afraid of big dreams. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't quite sure know what to make of this. At one level, it's an obvious troll. At another level, it's like another weird loyalty test for his faithful. Like he says a thing and then they all are, yes, Sean Hannity, I'm the expert on public opinion in Greenland. So they have to sort of adopt his rantings. I also think there's something serious here. In his first term, Trump floated the Greenland balloon repeatedly. Like it was a real thing. It wasn't like a thing he publicized. It clearly gnaws at him. Second of all, if he finishes out this upcoming term, he'll be 82 years old. The guy's the oldest man ever elected to be president. I think he's thinking about his legacy in whatever strange way he thinks of that. He's a property speculator. And then there's also the third aspect. Like, this doesn't come out of nowhere. Ronald Reagan rose to prominence in national right-wing politics on demagoguing about the Panama Canal. And right-wing authoritarian movements and leaders are all, as a rule, obsessed with conquest and territorial expansion everywhere. You could, for instance, read a single book about the long centuries of constant bloodshed and mayhem between European powers over their territories, or about World War I, or read a single book about World War II. This is what autocratic leaders and demagogues do. They need external enemies. They need conquest. It was out of all that bloodshed, tens of millions of people, that an international norm evolved, a norm still too often violated, yet important nonetheless. That says you don't just take over other people's land. Lydia Paul Green is an opinion columnist at the New York Times and the co-host of the Matter of Opinion podcast. She recently participated in a conversation with some of her more conservative colleagues on Trump in crisis mode on the world stage, and she joins me now. And you've also served as a journalist in a bunch of places around the world.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, what do you make of all this?
I mean, I think that on one level, it is a lot of trolling, right? And it's also some sort of prime distraction. It's a way to, I think, essentially act on the world stage in the way his apparent heroes, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, these autocratic rulers that he has, admired and talked about. He sees them, going after bits of territory, trying to reshape the map of the world. But I think, when you talk about making America great again, it's really a backward-looking exercise. It's this idea of going back to some legendary time when things were so wonderful and great. And in this case, we talk about tariffs, we talk about other things, and we're really talking about the 19th century, right? And we're talking about going back to a period
Peak
where...
McKinley, basically. Exactly.
And so we're talking about going back to a period where it was a kind of smash and grab, and everybody was trying to kind of find as much territory as they could in the world. And that was the way that you got to security. How did all of that end? It ended in World War II and the Holocaust, right? I mean, it ended in just astonishing human suffering. And that gave birth to an international system that allowed us to find ways to resolve these kinds of disputes and talk to one another. We don't need Greenland. I mean, we are in a NATO alliance with Denmark.
Yes, yes. All of it, everything makes sense if you're like, let me put on my 1893 cap about how I would think about this issue.
Yeah.
You actually is a very clarifying, tariffs and imperial conquest. I mean, this thing about the UN, I'm going to just read part of the UN Charter. And one of my unified theories for why everything is so messed up in the world is literally losing the like actual generation that remembered the horrors of World War II.
Yep.
And some of the lessons that gave about fascism and great power conflict.
Yep.
The United Nations Charter Preamble, we the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime have brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. You know, grabbing other people's land. And the way, that's the other thing about this troll. The Greenland thing is, he talks about it a little the way that Putin talked about Crimea.
Totally.
Like, oh, well, if you ask them, you know, they really kind of want to join us. Yeah. And I'm sure maybe you've had a little plebiscite over there. Maybe they'd vote for us. Like, it's the same thing.
No, absolutely. And I think, like, we don't actually have to go that far back, right? I mean, my mother's from Ethiopia, right? And Ethiopia and Eritrea have had this kind of ongoing border conflict.
Yep.
Ethiopia wants to have an access to the sea on the Red Sea and so on and so forth. You know, two of my uncles died fighting in those in those wars between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and for what? You know, this is why we have these
conquest and territory.
This is why we have these international agreements, these ways to work out these problems. You know, I mean, look. You know, if we put tariffs on Denmark over this Greenland fantasy, the only thing that's going to happen is that Ozempic's going to become more expensive. I mean, this is
which is an actual thing. Yes,
no, absolutely. They're the ones who make it.
You know. The idea of if you give a sort of genuinely psychologically damaged and broken person the biggest bully stick in the world, that's sort of what you get. And I think a lot of people are like, he's bullying. But again, that point you made about Xi and Putin, the kind of liberal internationalism that is so often honored in the breach and is so hypocritical and leads to horrible atrocities and, you know, that people look the other way. It's still better than what came before. And I think what Trump wants is what came before, where like no one's pretending and maybe we take our piece of the pie, Russia takes its, China does it, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I mean, that's a whole way of viewing the world. And it's a very old way, but it's also a way that I think there are a lot of players who would prefer to be operating in that world, right? I mean, you're talking about a world that is purely transactional, where there's no sort of agreed upon standards about how anybody is going to act. And, you know, I spend a lot of time focused on the developing world and the global South, because that's, you know, my passion and where I've spent most of my time as a reporter. And, you know, you talk to officials from these countries and they're like, you know what, we're tired of lectures about human rights from the Americans. And, you know, you talk about your principles, but then you ignore them in Gaza and things like that, right? So, you know, I do think that there is an audience for what Trump is selling. And, you know,
absolutely.
China is in those parts of the world. Russia's in those parts of the world. And they're doing these, you know, these deals. And you've got other players, whether it's, you know,
rip up the
Turkey.
charter and the poetics and just